Hello, everybody. Nextime is pleased to host today's knowledge sharing webinar. Thank you for joining us as we focus on the timely and critical issues surrounding cybersecurity. My name is Mark Lussum, and I am a Senior Executive Director with Nextime. Like many of you, I am a business executive with operating experience across multiple functions and industries. For the purpose of today's agenda, I partner with North American businesses seeking to transform their operations. I'd welcome meeting with any of you interested in learning more. Please note that you are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please share them with us through the chat box on the control panel. We'll address those questions towards the end of the webinar or in writing if time does not permit us to cover them during our broadcast. So today we're focused on the implications of the White House executive order on improving U.S. cybersecurity. After a brief presentation to set the context, we're going to have an in-depth panel discussion with cybersecurity thought leaders. Before we begin, I thought you might like to know that as a registered audience, you represent 26 unique industries, everything from law firms to government agencies to executives in banking, energy, and many other sectors. While the majority of you today are from the United States and Canada, we have a total of 26 countries represented. Your diverse experience demonstrates the breadth of the cybersecurity challenges we're all facing. Now I would like to welcome our esteemed guests. Supriya Anchan is a senior manager in Nextime's technology consulting and risk advisory practice, and she has over 15 years experience. In this capacity, she has led projects on data privacy and information system security. She also provides subject matter expertise in developing proprietary tools, and she was one of the lead team members responsible for Nextime's ISO certification. Supriya is a certified lead implementation professional, and she is certified in risk and information systems control. Dr. Anupam Srivastava is the Vice President of International Strategy and Business Development at SafeZone, a company that provides software-based technology support for classifying dual-use and munitions items. He has over 25 years experience working with advanced technology commerce and international security. He currently serves as a non-resident fellow at the Henry L. Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., which is focused on providing legal and regulatory assistance to government agencies and their high-tech industrial sectors. Anupam also served at the University of Georgia, where he was the assistant director at the Center for International Trade and Security, working on projects supporting both the U.S. government and international organizations. Jerry Leishman leads Cortex regulated security and compliance practice and supports defense suppliers with their cybersecurity posture. He's a trusted advisor, and he advocates to in-house counsels, compliance officers, and senior leaders to ensure that they effectively navigate complex regulatory and contractual risks and obligations. Jerry is active nationally on the CMMC AV Standards Workgroup and is a provisional CMMC assessor and registered practitioner. He speaks nationally on DFARS and CMMC impacts, and he partners with organizations to increase awareness for Pacific Northwest defense and aerospace manufacturers. Jerry is closely aligned with industry and technology leaders like Microsoft, AWS, and ExoStar in delivering world-class solutions. Keith Frederick has over 25 years experience as a Chief Information Security Officer in 4 different companies and currently serves as the CISO for RigNet. He is a retired U.S. Air Force officer who spent a great deal of his career attached to the intelligence community, specializing in cybersecurity. He also has authored 2 books on the topic, covering testing of cybersecurity and a manager handbook on implementing cybersecurity. Keith has hands-on experience in cybersecurity engineering and architecture, including risk management frameworks, cybersecurity frameworks, authorization and assessments, payment card industries, security control assessors, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and the Federal Information Security Management Act. And finally, Krishnanand Bhatt is the director of the Technology Risk Advisory Practice at Nextime, where he has led projects to streamline and build processes in vendor management, ISO certifications, and CMMI areas. With multiple certifications, including the ISSP, CISA, EDPSC, and FCA, and over 2 decades of experience in technology risk advisory and consulting, Krish has handled various projects while running his own cybersecurity venture. He also has past associations with both Deloitte and Protiviti. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and participating. We're very fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from you today. Now I'd like to hand the virtual podium over to Supriya, who will set the stage for our panel discussion with a very brief contextual overview. Supriya?
Thank you, Mark, and welcome to the presentation on being cyber resilient. We are in a unique position in the timeline of human history. The pandemic, technology-driven changes in work culture, and greater regulatory scrutiny have organizations tackle multiple layers to conduct business as usual. Cyber attacks have been consistent since the internet age, but the impact of these attacks of late on individuals, organizations, and nations at large seem to be focused and determined the effort to destabilize rather than a mere exploration for name, fame, and money. We have been exposed to the impacts of cyber attacks. The White House executive order is a step in the right direction to help us traverse confidently in this interconnected digital world. Next slide. Year 2020 was known notoriously not only for the COVID pandemic, but also for the surge in cyber crimes that we saw. Over 36 billion records were exposed in the year. What was different this time is organizations big and small, whether corporates or mid and small size business, were all exposed and impacted. Be it the celebrity accounts on Twitter, Facebook attacks, or the Kesaya attack where 1,500 mid to small size businesses were impacted, the Colonial Pipeline, or the SolarWinds system. Each of these organizations were attacked and had to face the plague of cyber attacks. Next slide, please. So what was different? Were these attacks different? Are they newer threats that organizations need to handle? Surprisingly, as per the ISACA report for 2020, social engineering was the most popular method of attack, something which we all are aware. Not just popular, but most effective. Phishing attacks, ransomware attacks, cloudjacking, targeted ransomware attacks are some of these attacks which organizations have already been handling and tackling. So what was different this time? Next slide. Let's look at SolarWinds. Entry into the government agencies through backdoor of an application for software update. What is shocking is not that they just gain entry, but remain undetected for a whole year. What was different? Were their audits not conducted, or were the audits not impactful and effective enough? Colonial Pipelines. Entry gained through an unused account. Organizations often create accounts, dummy accounts for vendors such as auditors and consultants for a particular assignment or assessment. What happens to these accounts once the assignment or assessment is over? Is there a simple review done to these unoperated accounts? Colonial Pipeline unfortunately has had to pay a demand of $4.4 million. And what was saddening was that the first time in its history of 57 years, they had to shut down the gasoline pipe supply. Next slide, please. So when organizations are aware that there is something called as cybersecurity, audits are being done, why this new directive? The new age wars today can be fought within the closed rooms through commands on a simple computer. This is a reasonably cheaper than traditional war and absolutely more effective and impactful. Hackers can bring down organizations and nations through bringing down the financial system, the health system, or the government system itself. You need not fight wars at the front line anymore. What causes all of this? Ineffective security standards and mechanisms being adopted. Organizations pick up frameworks and follow it because others, either within the same industry or it is the latest trend of frameworks that are being followed. We need to understand that these needs to be adopted based on the kind of businesses the organizations operate, the kind of people that we hire, the resources who are handling our security systems. Do they understand the impact of these kind of breaches? The kind of audit scenarios we build in to assess our systems, the type of passwords that we have, are they strong enough? What is the impact of not having a strong password? And most importantly, our reliance on third-party vendors. Are we moving to the cloud purely because everybody else in the industry is moving? Is it because I find it more cost-effective? Or is it because it is the most suitable option which I can opt for my business? These are the questions that the organizations and the management need to answer before opting for some service. Next slide, please. The frameworks and guidelines that are there are a book of steps that can help organizations reach their goal of cybersecurity. However, it's a twofold effort. The cybersecurity hygiene needs to be followed by the individuals within the organization to ensure they derive maximum benefits of the frameworks laid down. These frameworks are a means to achieve cybersecurity compliances, but they are not the ends to the means. What can organizations do to ensure that they are cyber resilient within the minimum limits that they have? Employee education. Train the employees to understand the impact of what an oversight from their part can cause the organization. The awareness training sessions should not be followed as a mundane activity that is carried on probably on a quarterly or a half-yearly basis, but more attuned to the work environment. Zero trust policy to be adopted. Trust no one, distrust no one. Your end user protection with the kind of scenarios that you can build it. Don't follow the standard scenarios. Look at your threat and incident reports and analyze what newer scenarios you can incorporate into your simulation to make your system more cyber resilient. Protection of the devices which hold your information and protection of the information itself. Merely handing over onto the cloud or giving it to a third-party vendor does not absolve us of our responsibilities. We are, at the end of the day, responsible for the data and infrastructure that lies with the third-party vendors. Achieving a cybersecurity resilient organization and a society is a twofold effect. It's not just the government's job to take this initiative. Next slide, please. So what are the steps to build a secure environment? Email security. Some of the sanctity that we need to bring into our organization. Email security, multi-factor authentication, restricted access, whether it is physical or logical, attack simulations, password policies. Have your audits incorporate newer situations, newer simulations, checklists and frameworks to be adapted to newer changing threat vectors that we currently face. Data backups and vulnerability management. Something which we do follow or probably are planning to follow on in our cybersecurity program. The hygiene to be followed for a successful cybersecurity program rests with the people and the management handling the organization. Next slide, please. Some quick tips to manage cybersecurity. In case of a breach, report the security incident immediately. However big or small, it has to be reported to the right department. Invest in people, that is the skill resources and technology that is useful for your kind of business. No matter if you have the best kind of resources, the best kind of systems in place, end of the day that has to be manned by a person. And if that person is not aware of what they have in their hand and what is the implication of manhandling or mishandling it, the entire investment is a waste. Routinely review your logs and incident reports to understand if there is a threat pattern. And if so, try to incorporate that into your internal audit simulation programs so that you're better geared up. Use these learning to adopt security standards that are most suitable to your organizations rather than adopting something which the industry is following. Cybersecurity is a culture that needs to be inculcated within the people of the organization. Each one needs to adopt what is most suitable for their organization. Most importantly, when we fail to prepare, we're already preparing to fail. So please be cyber vigilant. Thank you so much. I'll hand this over to Mark and the group of panelists waiting for you. Thank you so much.
Supriya, thank you so much. I appreciate the high-level overview. You covered a great deal. There's no question about that. I'm quite certain that the panel of experts that you all are about to meet will expand upon any number of the comments that Supriya made. But what's very clear is that the implications for the new directive are very far-reaching. So as a reminder, if you have questions, please use the chat box. And just a quick note to our panelists, if you are in mute mode, now would be a good time to unmute yourself because we're about to kick off the panel discussion. And I'm going to welcome Anupam, Jerry, Keith, and Krish to the conversation. I'd like to start off with a question for Anupam. And Anupam, you know, this might be self-evident to everybody, but it's a good place and as good a place as any to start the conversation. And you're the right person to start it with, and that is, cybersecurity threats aren't new. Well, we know that. They might be more publicized now. But why is it that the White House directive seems more relevant today?
Well, Mark, thank you. I hope the audio is clean for you all. And Supriya has set the stage with a wonderful 360-degree, analysis or SWOT analysis type presentation. In fact, one of the things I'll start off with is something she mentioned in the end, which is the cybersecurity culture. I should point out that in my work with the US government and others, one of the things we always talk about is that systems are only good as the people manning and operating those machines. And so on security culture, we have worked in the dual use munitions, chemical, bio, radiological types of things, and generated templates and things which have been adopted now by the International Atomic Energy Agency, UN organized, ODC, and many other, Interpol and others. So she's absolutely right that security culture is a value system that has to be imbibed by employees all the way up and down the management chain. Okay, next to your direct point, cyber attacks have grown massively, Mark, now in size, scale, complexity, methods of operations, all of those things. I'll give you some quick, cross-section of that. So some of the more recent and devastating attacks, some Supriya mentioned, but some others, you'll notice that they are being carried out with active state support. And so a diagnostic tells you that governments of Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and some others have been involved more than others. There are others as well I can name. And the methodology is that state-supported intelligence and other technical resources are brought to bear, provided to a group. They are given access and instructions. They act and get into other people's systems, but the state itself, the country's government, maintains an arm's length from them. So you have, in legal terms, a plausible deniability. And prosecuting or forcing these becomes really hard because I can hear my own audio feedback here, but I hope you all can hear me. All right. So the problem with prosecution and enforcement is that the data and evidence lies in hard disks or clouds across national jurisdictions. So unless you have mutual legal assistance treaties, information sharing agreements, and other kinds of things, you can't really prosecute these crimes. And that's what these smart operators take advantage of in creating a situation where national governments and corporations feel helpless. And that's why I mentioned at the top that a value system that has to be imbibed, and we can get into the details of what that security culture looks like inside an organization as we go into further into our discussion.
Okay, I appreciate that, and thanks for kicking us off. Unfortunately, I already have a follow-up question for you, so let's keep you on mic here for just a moment. We talked about the cybersecurity attacks not being new, but regulations to help address them aren't new either. So examples of that would be the Cloud Act, HIPAA, HITRUST, Department of Defense requirements, and on and on. So are these ineffective, or would you say they're effective? How would you put that in the context of the directive?
Yeah, no, they are effective, but after a point of time, they start hitting what in economics we call a law of diminishing returns. So because the criminals are learning at the same time, and remember, we are talking about technology, which is a dynamic concept. It keeps on changing and morphing and becoming more lethal. So, you know, staying cyber resilient or staying afloat on top of things is almost like rafting. You have to keep adjusting to the waves, right? So these regulations are designed to solve the problem that they saw at that point. It's a finite situation. And then the criminals evolve, and you have to chase after them. So regulatory updates are required, and that's where the government says, look, if you want to continue with the speed of business and the scale of business, you need to take up more onus, the corporates, to beef up your own security systems. And in this case, we are talking about cybersecurity. I'll give you a couple of examples of the inventiveness of the cyber attacks. The Chinese government has recently used resources from the Ministry of State Security. I'm saying this because Secretary Blinken is now talking about it in this current trip. In fact, he mentioned it today in Delhi. Right? So in the US side, Office of Personnel Management, Social Security Administration, Health and Human Services, these records of people have been hacked. And then they have used companies like Tencent, Huawei, and others to use big data analytics to identify people on the Chinese side who have been in touch with these people. And so all manner of purges to things that are happening on the Chinese side, and it's become a huge issue, human rights to other things. This is one example of what is happening. On the other hand, I was talking about how the methodology is changing. So a quick example would be that if you keep your main OEM secure, they will try to come into you through your intermediate goods or tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, or through your insurance providers, shippers, bankers, anybody who has access into your system. We can invest and insert a Trojan horse or a malware system through that. The security presumably is lax on that front. So this almost gets to a point of a 360 degree, and you have to make your own home base secure and then push out the security standards out to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, suppliers, insurance providers, an entire ecosystem of compliance. Adjusted, of course, and customize your requirements in size and scale. But that's essentially the message the government is sending here.
Yeah, thank you. I want to invite Jerry into the conversation now because Anupam speaks of the evolution of the cyber criminal, Jerry. And I guess let's start you off by asking a question about these well-publicized attacks, like the ones Supriya spoke of, SolarWinds, Colonial. There have been others. Do you think these are advanced, persistent threats? Would be number one. And while you're at it, I'd like your perspective on the directive, the White House directive, and the impact that it has on the cybersecurity frameworks as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I think we need to just take a step back and just recognize that last year in 2020, there was $1 trillion or even more of cyber theft by nation states, global criminals, and a variety of others. So if you look at $1 trillion, that's larger than the global drug trade. And you wonder, well, why, and which one's growing faster, right? Moving illegal products across borders, which is physical, well, that's pretty risky. You got to dig tunnels. But as we mentioned, for cyber thieves, they can be in a room in another country and nobody even knows them, and it's hard to find them. So the threat of prosecution is much lower when it comes to cyber theft than, say, physical drug trades. And with 5G and quantum computing coming, and which is going to be more prevalent? Obviously, cyber theft. So it's a growing concern, and to the point where it's actually on a national security concern for the United States and many of our allies. And that was what the impetus was for two things. One, the DoD, Department of Defense, has had regulatory requirements around ITAR for munitions for our country. It's been around since '72, but it really hasn't had a good standards on how to measure and protect that data. So it's been left up to kind of industry to figure that out. And some have done a good job, some haven't. But with the increasing cybersecurity, they implemented the DFARS rule. If you're familiar with that, it's a federal government, and they've implemented it based on the NIST 800-171 standards, which is 110 controls focused on cybersecurity. And by the way, that is really the only industry or national standard that we have for cybersecurity. It's not PCI, it's not SOX, which manage different data in different ways. So cybersecurity is NIST 800-171 is the national, and in some cases the world standard about what you need to do as an organization to better improve your cyber hygiene, as Supriya said. So that was back in 2017, they implemented DFARS. And then just November of last year, they updated the DFARS rule to an interim rule, which on November 30th required all the companies that supply critical or sensitive, controlled and classified data to the DoD to actually report their security and compliance posture based on NIST 800-171. And you wonder, well, why did they do that? Because prior to reporting to the DoD, it was all a self-attestation. And so companies were receiving contracts saying, yeah, we'll do this, but they never did. And that's why we have over $1 trillion in cyber theft, because people aren't protecting themselves. They say it, but they're not doing it. So government's been trusting our industry, but industry hasn't stepped up to it. So now you click forward to today, there's a new set of regulations called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification coming out of the DoD, which is changing, as Anna Perna said, is that the DoD and the federal government basically are saying, hey, industry, you're not following through, you're saying things, we're fining you, we're holding you accountable, but you're not changing your culture of security by design. So what we're going to do is we're going to start taking away your contracts by forcing to get an audit prior to contract award. So now you're talking about revenue for these companies, and if you're not compliant and secure, you don't pass a third-party audit, you don't get the award, and suddenly your company doesn't have revenue. Now you're facing bankruptcy, and that is the big stick the U.S. government has currently put in place to get people to take action to improve their cybersecurity posture. So having said that, that's what's been going on in industry up to today. Now, the executive order comes out because of the rash of ransomware. The executive order was initially focused on, securing the internal systems within the entire federal government, data encryption at rest and in transit, some basics. And that is going to set the stage for future regulatory requirements, both internally to the federal government. But we just saw today there was actually a couple weeks ago, the Department of Homeland Security put regulations on the pipeline business, colonial business. Say, hey, we're going to put some regulations on you to raise your game because you're not doing it on yourself, and you are critical infrastructure to our country, and people's lives are at stake, health and well-being, a variety of things that are driving this to be a national security concern. And even today, the executive order has been enhanced by another White House memorandum focused on internal control systems, basically critical infrastructure for utilities. They are coming out with another set of requirements focused on critical infrastructure. One is protecting the lives of people, public health, economic prosperity, and our advantages of the country. So the federal government, federal, state, local, and tribal is now really picking up on the executive order and going after at an agency level into all critical infrastructure industries, and it'll probably roll out to all industries that do work in the around the world, because it's just the cost of doing business in today's state is you got to raise your cybersecurity posture and bar. So that's the mega trend that's going on that we're seeing, and it's happening even today. So you can go out and look at that White House memorandum and see kind of the next iteration as it's beginning to flow down from Biden down to all of our infrastructure and commercial companies.
I appreciate
just one last. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so I know there are a lot of legal professionals on this call. And when I speak to our legal professionals, I say, hey, did you know that you were hired to understand all of these requirements, all of the standards based on your contracts, the regulations that your company deals within, and actually your specific contract agreements? You have to understand all of those things across your enterprise. And more importantly, you need to enforce that to make sure that everybody's delivering. Because if you don't, and you fail an audit or you get breached, they're coming back to talk to you. So as a compliance officer, legal counsel, it's really, really, really important that you understand this stuff, because your company depends on you managing it, because it's not an IT issue anymore, it's a business risk. Now they're tying it to contracts and the life and resiliency of your companies. So anyway, that's just all that I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it goes to the timeliness of this topic, just to the fact that there was a statement today that everybody can be made aware of, but also the business risk. So Keith, let's focus on that for a second. Jerry spoke to the lack of revenue as a potential outcome or bankruptcy. Let's put this into a situational scenario. If I'm the unfortunate target of a cyber attack, what is your counsel to me and to my organization insofar as an immediate response?
Well, thank you. My advice to the community would be, I'm hoping that you already have an incident response plan, one that you've already done the preparation for. You've maybe had a couple of exercises, but realistically, once you're under an attack, you have to get to a point to where very quickly you analyze it and you're recognizing that it's a bad thing or it's just an oops that an employee did. If it's a bad thing, then you got to quickly quarantine or contain the situation. And realistically, for a business side, you really want to stay in operations. So as you have quarantined the bad, get back into operations, at least the bare minimum that keeps you alive and well, and making the money that keeps your office open. But then after that, you come back and you figure out where did this happen? Why did it happen? How did it happen? And that takes a little bit of forensics involved. But at that point, you can actually start doing lessons learned, right? And then obviously, because of the lessons learned, you want to basically find out how not to fall into that pit again. So as one might say, you basically get to a point where you kind of do a situation where you find it, you bag and tag it, you get back in operations, go back to the situation, and you basically eradicate it after you learn the lesson that you have so you can stop it. Now, let me just give 1 second to a lesson learned that the Air Force fighter pilots and the Navy learned a lesson back in their little skirmishes back in the 70s and 60s. And that was that those pilots that actually had 10 dogfights and survived, from that point on, their survivability was in the factor of 90 percentile. So as you as a business recognize that, yes, you know that when you're in the heat of battle, if you've already got the plan together, if you've already kind of went through it, you know who to talk to, who's doing what they're doing, how they're doing, and then the situation becomes what? Oh yeah, it's less critical, therefore you're better reacting. Thank you.
And thank you. Krish, I'm going to just say right now that you win the award for patience. Well, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Mark.
I saw on Supriya's slides, she spoke to a number of the interventions that an organization can take to start putting their cyber resilience, cybersecurity protections in place. And one of them was zero trust architecture. So a lot's been made of that, but I wonder, for those who are not specifically aware of what this is, if you can define that for the audience today and answer the several challenges. Does that answer those challenges that we face in today's interconnected world? Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah. So zero trust can be defined as a term of evolving set of cybersecurity paradigms that move defenses from static network-based perimeters to focus on user, assets, and resources. So in a layman's term, define the security once and forget it would not work. You need to keep evolving your strategies, keep evolving your intelligence, and also your controls and frameworks on the way times keep changing with evolving technology, 5G coming into play, and with cyber attacks being a profession of choice of late. So these cyber criminals are no more script kiddies who are exploring and trying to do things for money. Most of the time they are sponsored and they earn hefty sum to destabilize organizations. So zero trust as a concept says that we move from trusted computing base. So trusted computing base was a concept which was evolved as computers and internet started growing, where machines were allowed to trust each other, communicate, and then have a seamless manner of moving around. Zero trust reiterates the fact that these are machines, these are not humans. They really don't need emotions to survive together. So every time you need to welcome someone in, validate, identify, understand, and then authorize them entry. This entire concept is quite old. In fact, John Kinderberg, an industry analyst at Forrester, repopularized this term zero trust, and a Swedish gentleman re-emphasized and built something called as a zero trust framework for the first time. And now it is the go-to thing that needs to be done. Our devices, our networks, our people, each one of them who utilizes the technology paradigm needs to be validated, not once, but every time. And I think that's how you're able to balance your security posture with the changing technology and the upcoming challenges that come around it.
The zero trust sounds like it's one piece of Supriya's pie that she spoke to. So I'm going to go back to Keith for a second, Keith, and I'm going to do that and put us back in that. How do I avoid that attack if I'm in business? And you know, unfortunately, I think I've been there. What other preemptive messages, preemptive policies or measures can be put in place to prevent these attacks if I'm a business leader and I want to try and do everything I can do now?
Well, I would start off by advising them to start thinking strategic and planning, and with an implementation on the tactical. The view needs to come to a point where you're doing it holistically. You're basically running into situations where the weakest link is the broken link. So basically bring your people together, bring your technology together, bring your processes together, and work together. The other thing that you really have to recognize as you go back into the tactical is that you need good cyber hygiene, in the fact that the hygiene now, like when you take a shower, you use deodorant, you brush your teeth. Well, in cyber, these basics are complex passwords. Are you using long passwords, 14 characters maybe, in the situation where you're using upper and lower characters and numbers and punctuation marks? How often do you have them change that? Firewalls are now a thing that is standard in a network, and they should be. It's just a fact. Like antivirus scanners, and the fact that these scanners, though, only attack or only defend you from the known signature base that they can. The other side of this is the vulnerability management that was recognized earlier in slides, that, hey, keep things up to date. The fact that you cannot defend yourself if you don't know what you're defending. The same thing with your management on the vulnerabilities is that you should keep your stuff up to date. There's known vulnerabilities, there's known fixes. These vendors that are out there, they are literally working night and day to, when they get a problem, they literally try to get you the fix action within hours. Data backup in the situation that if something happens, that you can actually get your data back. everybody knows that you can rebuild the system, be it operating system, the application reload, but it's the data that you had on there that's so important, those documents, those spreadsheets. And the biggest bang for buck, I would say, is training, and the fact that you need to basically bring all the people in. You use training as a force multiplier, and the fact that you will never ever have enough money, enough personnel in cybersecurity to actually implement a well-rounded. So you need to bring in everybody in your company to basically know how to defend yourself, like from phishing and ransomware. That training could be monthly, an annual security awareness to allow people to understand. And that incident response team needs training and run through exercises. But guys, realize that you just can't keep this business focused on training. You have to bring it to a personal. You have to allow them to understand how they can take these things home and actually spread the wealth of that knowledge to their spouse, to their children, and keep them from harm's way, because those bad guys are after their bank account as well. Now, to better your posture, let me just add a few things before I quit. One of them was that multi-factor that was on the slide earlier. That basically implement or contract a SOC that would actually utilize a IDS, IPS AI to actually watch your doors at your boundaries. And obviously the email scanner, because 90% of all attacks nowadays basically start with email. And yes, that centralized logger, that SIM, is a very important part of upscaling your cyber posture. Thank you.
And thank you. And I'm glad you brought the, do you have a comment, Jerry?
Yeah, this is Jerry. I think I mentioned NIST 171. There's 110 cybersecurity controls, and Keith just went through, some of the critical ones. There are other ones, but the real challenge I see with many of my customers is, where do I start? How do I prioritize? I will never be done, but I only have limited funds and limited skill sets. So I recommend, you need to do a discovery to figure out what your security and compliance profile is. Do that penetration testing to see what's already in your systems. It's just sitting there ready to be exploded in ransomware, for example, or even nation state. So you got to look inside your business engine, but at the same time, you got to look at your people and process around data protection and data governance, because those things are really where your risks are. So that means do a risk assessment, both your data flows, the people process technology, look at that, really understanding your posture, and then now you have an enterprise view. Then you take a risk-driven approach to doing all those mitigations that Keith just talked about. 2 factors, a big impact, right? Our phishing training, those are big impact that you're going to want to prioritize, but you still want to get down to, incident response. Maybe that's a mid-level risk, but it helps you with your journey. And this is always a journey. It's not a get there, stay there. It's a get compliant, stay compliant, and resilient. So it's a never-ending experience in today's world. So it's not like PCI where every year you get a check mark and you're good to go for another year or 2 years. This is something you have to treat it as a program. It's got to be institutionalized in your organization. As Anupam said, it's got to be security by design. It's got to be a culture change. And that's what the DoD is trying to change. The 300,000 suppliers in the defense space, which is completely unregulated, and now they're going to become the most regulated industry in the world. The real thing, and they use the term institutionalization of security by design, a foundation. Doesn't matter if you have good performance, cost management, but if you're not secure and that data is stolen, none of it matters. So that's why this is so critical, not only in the government space, but in the commercial space. So I just say, start with a risk to manage or a risk assessment to prioritize your work as you move through that mitigations and improving your security posture. So I just want to say that.
No, I'm glad you chimed in there. I also wanted to comment back to Keith. I appreciate you brought up the personal aspect of it, because while it's an annoyance for all of us, let's just be real out here, all these password changes and how many we have, and whether they're 8, 10, 14 special codes at capitalizations, et cetera. The fact is, the personal side of this, what we're doing at home is as much at risk as what we're doing in the office. And so I'm glad you brought that up. It's a little bit of an annoyance, but it's better safe than sorry to focus on that. And Jerry, you brought up Anupam, and I want to ask him a question in this regard. Specific to the directive, Anupam, do you think there's any additional steps that have not yet been mentioned by Keith or Jerry that should be taken at this point?
Well, not to the directive itself, but I think we are all speaking to that same subject of how you have to keep on diagnosing how the problem is changing and then keep responding and fixing it. So I'll give you another example from what Jerry was saying in the end about ITAR. So these are munitions regulations in the US government. There used to be tens of thousands of them. The US government has been in talk with the US companies for years about these things and saying, if you're going to make these standards so strict, we are not going to be able to access technology from outside or sell to customers outside. And there's a lot of loss of it, not just business loss, but also us knowing the technology platform on which those others are operating, right? Now, see how that has morphed and how it plays into this one. So in ITAR, from Obama's time onwards, there's been a set of reforms, and a number of items have been moved out into the dual-use category in customs. In commerce, BIS. These are aircraft and other things, 600 series, 9X515 series, and so on. Now, what is remaining in ITAR are purely military items. And for example, the head of Lockheed calls what is remaining in there requires extreme due diligence. What does he mean by that? Exactly what you said, Mark, that these items are known to be military items. And so DoD follows what is called a see-through rule. Even the tiniest bit of US component, if it is outside in anybody's value chain, I have my extraterritorial right to legislate and see what is going through, and US laws are being complied with. In return, for companies to be able to access these things or build those things, they need to come up, not only comply with US regulations, but cyber is a very important piece of this, because what happens is you may have an encrypted chip that goes to Singapore from the US. It has just been worked on, and then it has, after value addition, on to South Korea for something, and then comes back to Europe and back to the US. The scope for cybersecurity and cyber and intrusion is enormous throughout this process, and each of those companies has major legal loopholes and implications of what happens along the way in their value chain, right? So rather than just keep talking about directives, I think the advice is that companies should understand that this is the mode of doing business from now on. Understand and picture yourself to be a person as a cyber criminal who is looking to hack into your system, and do a SWOT analysis of your own operations, figure out where the vulnerabilities are, secure your own system, then pass on these security compliance regulations outside to your suppliers. This has been done. The Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, CTPAT. There are major international operations, secure freight initiatives, many examples of international trade examples I can give you, where these manufacturing and other standards have been given. That's why I said that a simple way to understand this is that just like there is very specific guidance on chemical, biological, radiological, military, and other items, cyber is an element through which crime can be committed. And so a layer of cybersecurity is being added, and government is recommending to companies add this layer of security to your existing internal compliance program. That's how you should look at this. And this thing will keep morphing, as I said. And so to give you one more analogy, life in this era is like staying on an escalator. You have to keep moving at the speed of technology and business to stay in the same place. And that's what really is required. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, you know what? I think it does. It's also generating a lot of questions. Let me just say to the panel and to the audience, questions are flying in here. So I'm going to try and summarize some of these things I'm seeing, as well as the talking points, and we will address as many of them right now. And then if we can't, we'll respond to you in writing after this session, I promise. Krish, is there a roadmap, taking into account everything that's occurred? And I'm also looking at some of these audience questions. Is there a roadmap for these global organizations that are looking to comply with the directive, that is a service provider you recommend that people take?
Yeah, actually, for organizations globally who are trying to navigate these plethora of regulations, government expectations, and cyber attacks, they need to prioritize and adapt secure technology. They need to go for Zero Trust architecture, there's already an implementation plan and framework recommended by NIST, so they could follow that. They also need to invest in people and skill sets. One thing that usually organizations are blind spotted about are risk management. So technology risk per se does not mean only having cyber products that protect, assess, and help you navigate, identify, and recover. The ingenuity of human mind and the survival of human race is because we are able to evolve. And we fail to understand that cyber criminals also learn the same tricks that we use to protect ourselves. So as cyber secure professionals, we need to keep upgrading our understanding and the way we manage and maintain our posture. It's an evolutionary journey. And as we say everywhere, you need to keep changing with the changing times. And you need to also ensure your weakest link, that is, people are empowered, enforced, trained, and guided how to manage themselves. As Keith emphasized on cyber hygiene, yes, it has to become a practice. It has to become a way of life. So I don't do things which I'm not supposed to do. Why? Because it could cause harm to me. It could cause harm to others. It's like holding a bomb in a marketplace and trying to unpin it or unplug it. Nobody is going to do that unless he's crazy. It's the same like sharing your passwords or leaving your machine on or going into sites which are not relevant for you or not relevant for your business. Trusting your vendors beyond a threshold and never take a checklist approach. Checklists don't stand the test of time. You need to keep evolving your strategies, start thinking the way the cyber crooks think, and keep protecting and enhancing your defenses. That's the mantra and roadmap. Nothing is static or nothing is written in sand here. You need to keep strategizing, keep evolving, and keep enhancing. That's how you will be able to be cyber secure.
Hey, Mark, can I say one more thing?
Does anybody have anything to add? I'm going to go to closing remarks. And again, I know audience, I'm trying to get all your questions here. We will respond in writing again to those that were unable to in this hour time frame. I'll
add a.
Go ahead.
May I add a tiny addition to the list that Jerry and Chris just mentioned? In the compliance field, very often when you're dealing with controlled sensitive information, a simple thing helps a lot, which is that when workers are dealing with controlled information, when they have to send out emails and interface with customers, those emails, because of the nature, are marked sensitive, and then instead of going directly to the consumer, goes to the compliance cell, which quickly reviews it, marks it, authorizes, and then sends it out to the customer. This single act has saved companies a lot of grief and violation of compliances. So I would add that to the checklist of what we were discussing here.
And one last question, one last input, Mark. Supply chain risk. We live in an interconnected world where every piece of hardware that comes to you is actually an amalgamation of various tiny parts that could be manufactured anywhere in the world, consolidated in some third country, and then it comes fresh packed from Amazon to your homes. Now, the risk is that each of these components could be tampered. Each of these components could have any kind of malware where the intent of the manufacturer may not be wrong, but the people working for the manufacturer could manipulate the system to give you something which could be incorrect. So supply chain risk is a very important fact, and in fact, the executive order emphasizes again and reiterates that your supply chain has to be strengthened. The security around your supply chain has to be strengthened, and you need to be very mindful about from where and how am I building what I'm building and delivering to my customers. So I think that's a very important point that needs to be also a takeaway.
You know, it's interesting as I look at the questions, there are a number of questions that are talking about vendors and supply chain and trusting the government. And and bringing them into your confidence and whatnot. I only say that as a setup to any of you who might want to address that in your closing remarks. And in order, I would like to ask, maybe we each take 30, 45 seconds or so to have a closing remark, and maybe start with Anupam, then go to Jerry, and then finishing with Krish. So Anupam, I'll turn it over to you for any last remarks you'd like to leave the audience with.
All right, so two quick remarks. One, to pick up on Krish's point on supply chain security. There's also another directive issued by the White House, the NDAA 2019, Section 889. What it's talking about is 5 named Chinese OEMs and all of their subsidiaries. And the regulation says any company supplying anything to the US government has to submit in writing a declaration that none of your products or services have been sourced from any of these Chinese agencies and their subsidiaries. And they run into more than 4,000 of them and situated all over the world. That same list of 5 has just been added on by another 12. So you can see where the White House and government is going, saying, please screen everything in your supply chain. And the way to do it is what we've been discussing all through. So that's my specific point. I think I don't have any words of wisdom other than to say that constant due diligence and monitoring and having an approach of, if I were a criminal, how would I invade my own system? That approach has to be kept in mind, and that's how you identify vulnerabilities and fix them. So with that, I just wish everyone good luck.
Thank you, Anupam. Jerry?
Yeah, I want to look at it from a business perspective. I mean, there's so many things that we need to do. 5G, advanced threat persistence, what the security postures are of companies, right? And we all look at that and go, that's a lot. We know it's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to take a long time, and it never ends, right? So that's the facts of doing business, in a connected world. However, if you take a step back and, I mentioned earlier, for at least the Department of Defense, they look at performance, capability, but they've added security as a foundation in their cybersecurity verification requiring third party. So if you look at that, that's a big change. That's a cultural change. That's an industry change. that's catastrophic level sort of change in the industry. Starting with defense, it's going to go across all federal government, and it's going to come across all industry, starting critical infrastructure, even down to maybe even consumer, right? Because all of it is about going after high value targets that people are willing to pay for. You look at all the different ones that have been attacked. So having said that, what industries are most affected? Everyone. How do I figure out my own company? Say, hey, what are my high value assets if they were stolen or held ransom? What I pay for? You got to go after those first and protect them. However, if you step back and say, oh wow, this is a great opportunity to say, what if I become the low risk supplier to the government or in a supply chain? And maybe if I'm a DoD, I get my CMMC certification, NIST 171, and I'm leaning in. I'm an early adopter. By the way, of the 300,000 clients that are out there I'm working with, about 10% are early adopters. And why are they early adopters? One is they want to protect their own information first, but they want to protect their own customers' information, in this case, the DoD or other companies. But then they realize that security becomes a value add when they sell their services, because organizations are going to look for low cost suppliers, or not low cost, but low risk suppliers, because it's all about risk management. It's not cost anymore. So as you look at the supply chain, if you become an early adopter and invest in your cybersecurity to really raise your cybersecurity bar, you're going to sell more business because people will trust you. And once they trust you, you're going to be able to go and take business away from the laggards and say, I don't want to pay this. It's just an IT issue, or that's it's not going to happen to me.
Sure.
Right? It will happen. So being an early adopter, embracing it, use it as competitive advantage, not only for the industry you're in, but as these requirements roll across the industry, it's an opportunity for you to be a key competitor in those new industries if you have a product or service. So it's a great opportunity to seize market share, be an early adopter. So I say lean in, go for it, and it's a once in a lifetime opportunity if you really understand as a savvy owner that let's use security as a differentiator. So that's what I tell the executives. So.
Yeah, having a long-term view seems to be a good investment. Keith, a couple of final closing comments, and I'll ask the audience to hang with us just a minute more.
All right, I appreciate everybody listening in, and thank you so much for allowing us your time. The only thing I would say on the presidential executive order, there's one major point in the executive order that comes out and says they want to strengthen the cybersecurity standard. The world actually is involved and has been for a few decades now in developing controls. And it's in NIST Special Publication 800-53. And I would say to corporates as well as government that are familiar with this already, that start there, recognize what controls you want to implement. So you actually have a point where you know find out what you have is for system and controls, find out what you want, the controls you want to implement, and assess them, and then realize that that assessment becomes your focus now at spending resources and your money and your time at fixing the difference between the two. Thank you.
And thank you. Krish, over to you.
I would only say cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. So don't rely on any directive to tell you how secure you need to be. It's like protecting yourself. When you protect yourself, you protect your organization. When you protect your organization, you protect the society at large, and then it spreads to the country. So it needs to become a way of life. Organizations should not make the policy of investing only in protection and detection technologies. They need to also start looking at responding, reacting, preempting, and being agile and resilient. So these are the other pillars that remain unaddressed. Most of the time, we only invest in protection and detection. We forget that we need to do monitoring, we need to be resilient, and we need to also be recovering against any kind of threat. And I think that's the trick. All the 5 pillars are relevant and important. Don't invest your money only on 2 or 1 of the pillars.
Thank you. And thank you all. By the way, I want to thank our listeners. Really, I mentioned at the beginning of 26 countries across the world. So thank you, and thank you for joining. Some of you are going to be listening on delay based on time zone changes, but we certainly appreciate your interaction. That was terrific. We did not cover our agenda because we started to address your agenda with questions, but we didn't answer all of those. So again, we will do so in writing after the fact. So thank you to you for joining us. Thank you to our distinguished guests, Anupam, Jerry, Keith, Supriya, Krish. You guys offered a terrific amount of insight, and knowledge you have is apparent. And I hope everybody who listened in was able to take something away that'll help secure their own business and personal interests. I want to thank Mondak for providing this terrific platform for us to bring this session to you today, and to the countless number, truly the countless number of my Next Time colleagues who worked behind the scenes to bring the knowledge sharing event to life here today. So if you do have additional questions, please submit them through to us via thinknext@nexttime.com, and our team will respond. Similarly, if you wish to learn more about us, please reach out using that same address. Across the globe, we do think next at Next Time, and we invite you to do the same. We welcome your feedback on today's presentation. Please be vigilant. Please stay safe. Thank you and goodbye.